Hello, world curious folks. Welcome back to Explore and Discover Curious World. Today we're diving into a topic that makes dark sound like an understatement. If you've ever wondered just how far humanity can go in the name of science, or rather, a twisted idea of science, this is the video for you. Today we're talking about Unit 7 and 31, the Japanese military division from World War II, infamous for medical experiments that make horror movies look tame. But before we dive into this nightmare, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, have your notifications on, and leave a like if you have the courage to face one of the most brutal stories in history. Ready? Buckle up. Chapter 1, The Roots of Horror, Japan's Expansive Ambitions. To understand the roots of this story, we need to go back to the 1930s. Japan had grand plans to become a global empire. Let's just say it wasn't going to let ethics stand in the way. With the invasion of Manchuria, the Japanese government began a plan to turn their scientific knowledge into weapons of war. The creation of Unit 731. Enter Shiro Ishii, a young, brilliant scientist with a talent for medicine and a character we could call problematic. Ishii understood that modern warfare wouldn't just be fought with conventional weapons, but also with biological and chemical agents. So, with the support of the Japanese Imperial Army, he established Unit 731 in 1932, a research unit that would carry out human experiments to develop biological weapons. The secret lab. To create such a sinister laboratory without drawing attention, Japan decided to build the facility in Manchuria, far from prying eyes. Beware, Pingfang wasn't just a research lab. This complex, as large as a small town, housed prison cells, torture chambers, and labs designed to produce and test pathogens on a massive scale. It was like a theme park from a horror movie. Chapter 2, Who were the victims and why? The Maruta, prisoners reduced to lab materials. For Unit 731, people weren't people, they were Maruta, Japanese for logs, a grotesque way to dehumanize the victims. Who were these people? Prisoners of war, Chinese citizens, political opponents, and even people who just happened to live in the wrong place, all dragged into the labs to be treated like disposable lab materials. The forced recruitment of lab subjects. Imagine the scene. A group of Japanese soldiers roams the streets of Manchuria, capturing anyone who looks healthy. These people are taken to Pingfang, blindfolded and locked in cells. But Japan didn't stop at using already captured prisoners. Inside the lab, they even encouraged the production of new prisoners. Some women were forced to carry pregnancies to term, only to have their children turned into lab subjects too. Living conditions. The scientists at Pingfang initially kept the prisoners in decent physical condition at first, all to ensure they were in the best possible health for experiments. They were fed and kept warm, but not out of kindness. It was just a quality control measure to ensure the accuracy of the experimental results. Chapter 3, Experiments that Defy Imagination. Extreme experiments, hunger, thirst, and sleep deprivation. Let's start with the human endurance tests. Prisoners were left without food or water for days to see how long the human body could survive before collapsing. Others were subjected to sleep deprivation, kept awake until they passed out from exhaustion. These experiments had nothing to do with science. They were pure torture, conducted by people determined to push every boundary. Hypothermia experiments, deadly ice baths. One of the most chilling experiments conducted at Pingfang involved freezing. Prisoners were submerged in icy water until their limbs froze. The scientists observed, measured, and recorded every detail of the freezing process. When the tissues were fully solidified, Ishii and his assistants tested the frozen extremities by smashing bones and tissue. The cruelty here was extreme, with some prisoners left in this state for hours or even days until their bodies literally broke down. Experiments with biological weapons. Not content with testing the physical limits of human endurance, Unit 731 also dedicated itself to biological weapons. Prisoners were injected with diseases like bubonic plague, cholera, and various other pathogens. But it didn't stop there. These infected prisoners were then confined in rooms with healthy people to study how the diseases spread. A preferred method involved making an infected prisoner live with a healthy one and waiting. Experiments on pregnant women. The cruelty of Unit 731 extended even to pregnant women. Pregnant prisoners were seen as valuable resources for studying infectious diseases in fetuses. Depending on the pregnancy stage, women were injected with various viruses, and the fetuses were surgically removed to observe the effects of the infection at different stages of development. The details are so disturbing that they're hard even to imagine. Chapter 4, The Madness Expands, Unit 731 in action. Large-scale experiments, the start of total insanity. As the war approached, Unit 731 decided to shift from individual experiments on prisoners to full biological attacks on villages and enemy troops. In 1939, during a conflict between Japan and Russia, Ishii decided to test his biological weapons, ordering the contamination of rivers with plague bacteria to see if the enemy troops would get infected. Fortunately, in this case, the experiment failed, but Ishii was undeterred. Biological attacks on Chinese civilians. In 1940, Japanese planes dropped sacks of grain infected with bubonic plague on Chinese villages. The population, thinking they'd received food supplies, gathered the grain. What followed was a devastating epidemic that killed hundreds of people. But this wasn't the only attack. Unit 731 continued to test its biological weapons on other Chinese cities, causing epidemics of cholera and typhus that killed tens of thousands of civilians. The final unexecuted operation, an attack on the United States. At the end of the war, Ishii and his colleagues planned a biological attack on California in an operation called Cherry Blossom at Night. The idea was to infect the population of the West Coast with pathogens, using kamikaze planes loaded with viruses. Fortunately, this plan was never carried out, but it reveals the mindset of Unit 731, a mindset that knew no limits to cruelty. Chapter 5, The End of Unit 731 and the Price of Science. Surrender and escape from justice. At the end of World War II, with Japan's defeat, Unit 731 ceased operations. But before retreating, Ishii ordered all documents destroyed, remaining prisoners executed, and the labs at Pingfang blown up. However, some information survived and fell into American hands. The twist, immunity in exchange for data. Incredibly, the United States decided not to prosecute Ishii and his scientists. In exchange for their experimental data, the Americans offered immunity. The people responsible for Unit 731 were never held accountable for their crimes. Shiro Ishii died a free man, never called to answer for the atrocities he committed. And so, this is the story of Unit 731, a dark chapter that shows just how far humans can go in the name of science, but at what cost? Now I'll leave you with a question. Do you think it was right that the people responsible for these atrocities went free without facing consequences? If this video gave you something to think about, leave a comment, subscribe for more strange and unsettling stories from around the world, and turn on notifications. See you next time on Explore and Discover Curious World.